Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Ed Rights Unplugged podcast. My name is Francesca Corbis. I'm the Director of Special Education at K. Altman Law, as well as the Director of the Advocacy Circle. With me are two of our expert special education advocates from K. Altman Law, who also contribute to everything that is on the Advocacy Circle platform. Why don't you both introduce yourselves?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Lotuk. I am one of the special education advocates here at K. Altman Law. I'm excited to be here today to talk about summer and what we look for during summer, especially for our students with IEPs.
Hi, my name is Becky Davis. I'm also one of the special education advocates at K. Altman Law, and I'm happy to be here chatting about how we can support our students with disabilities over the summertime.
Excellent. So this is a special episode because we feel very strongly about the time frame between the end of previous school year and the new school year. We have this time frame upcoming throughout the country where we work. We see different end of year school dates, and we also see start of school dates being different. Some schools end in May, some end in June, some start back up in August, some start back up in September. So we see, different issues kind of arise throughout this four-ish month time frame. So today we're going to be talking about getting ahead of some of these things that we see during the summer, and we're going to be talking about what these things are that happen in the summer for kids who kind of need consistent support through the school year, because it's a no-brainer that they'll need it through the summer as well. And for parents who are involved with a child with special needs, they know that this is unfortunately a constant job that they have to take part in. Luckily, there are individuals, like people on our team who are here to help those families. But let's just get right into it. So, right now it's March, so summer does feel far away, does it not?
It really
Uh,
does, but it's not.
it it does, but then it becomes very, very quickly here. And parents often think of it as a break, right? Because it is, and it should be. And every kid, every person deserves, a lighter schedule, more activities that don't involve kind of aggressive use of certain, thinking and academics. But for many students, it can mean a loss of the progress that's made during the school year. So really, summer is either a bridge forward into the next school year, or it can be a step backward. It depends on what parents know, what families know, and what schools are able to do for the child, both at the end of the school year, through the summer, and into the next school year. So let's talk about why summer matters for students who are on IEPs. So Sarah, can you talk to me about what regression and recoupment are, and why they matter in terms of the summer progress?
Yeah, sure. And I'm sure this comes up a lot of times during annual IEP meetings with families, right? These are important discussion points, especially when we're talking about looking at support over the summer. So to break it down kind of simply, when we look at regression, that really just means what skills does that student lose that they previously had, right? So sometimes over breaks, we see that a student had a previous skill and that after that long break, they no longer are able to demonstrate that skill, right? So, and we know that skills can be lost over a break, over a long illness, or any gap in instruction. And then recoupment is the ability to regain those skills back in an appropriate amount of time that had regressed, right? So we want to make sure that when regression happens, and we can expect some regression over summer, that the recoupment period is not significant, right? So that that student recoups those skills that they once had in an appropriate amount of time. So if you think about it simply, regression equals losing the skill, and then recoupment equals getting that skill back.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. That was really clear. And Becky, can you talk to us about some of the skills that are at risk of regression during timeframes like the summer?
Sure, yeah, there are a lot of really important skills that we see kind of commonly at risk with regression. Reading is definitely one of those skills, especially when we see kind of the blocks of that have to build on one another. And so if we lose a couple gaps, we can definitely see regression there. We also see regression in social skills. If students are not participating in those social activities and having practice with all of those different things, those are definitely things that can also regress. And also things like executive functioning, where students are learning to be on top of their own educational skills, and we can see regression in those areas as well.
Great points. Absolutely. These are the ones that I would say come up the most for sure. Um, so Sarah, can you talk to me about maybe a real life example that you've seen with families where this time frame has caused some regression?
Sure. And again, I do want to talk about regression. So every student, we can expect some regression, right, over the summer. But when we're looking at students with an IEP, we want to make sure it's not significant and that those foundational skills that were taught previously are not lost and have to be retaught. And then it takes a significant amount of time, right? So I can think of a young student, second grader, who really was focusing on reading, so CVC words, right? And they mastered their goal. And then over the summer, obviously, long period of time, they weren't reading consistently. They weren't having that frequent practice, right? And came back to school, and that goal had to be readdressed, right? So it was a goal that was previously mastered, and then that student lost it. So, and typically, you know, a lot of these skills, especially younger students, they need daily practice, right? So we want to make sure that over the summer, whether they're receiving ESY services or a family's doing private sessions with a practitioner, or the family themselves is working with a student, that they're, you know, providing that kind of instruction at home as well, and that practice, that daily practice.
Absolutely. Um, so can you talk to me, Becky, about how long it can take to regain some of those skills that are lost?
Sure. I mean, it's a very individual thing, right? And so we will see different lengths of time with different students to regain lost skills. But it can take a while. And then part of the problem also becomes in the time that they are working to make up what they've lost. They're also not keeping up with the rate of learning that's happening in the new school year. So really, it can set kids back months of progress in order to regain what they've lost, and then also to catch up with what they missed while they're making things up.
Very good point. Very good point. So this is kind of the ripple effect of lost progress is what you're talking about, which is a
Absolutely.
really good point that kind of gets lost. And then when that's compounded over years of time, that can really impact a student's learning. So, not to sound too urgency focused, but we've seen kids lose months of progress over just a few weeks when not,
Right.
given the services they need. So just snowballing off of that, and keeping in mind that we always say that this is a very hard job for caregivers. So any errors made, we're not saying this in a way to criticize that, because a lot of this stuff is very, very non-intuitive. But there are some common mistakes that can be remedied that caregivers and parents make. So Sarah, can you talk to me about a couple of mistakes that parents make in terms
Sure.
of the summer?
Yeah, biggest mistake is waiting too long, right? So if it's a concern, or if that parent is seeing regression over breaks, and that could be as simple as the longer holiday breaks that students are receiving, and they're noticing it's taking their student or child a longer time to regain those skills after those breaks, is bringing that up to the school as part of the IEP team discussion prior to the end of the school year, right? Because if we're planning for potentially an extended school year program, that needs to be decided on and discussed ahead of the end of the school year. So that's probably the biggest mistake, is not planning for summer early enough, right? And it may not be at the top of a parent's mind in the middle of the school year, but it really should be. Also assuming the school will handle it automatically. So not bringing that concern to the school and thinking that the school will bring it up to the family, that they're noticing some concerns and that that student probably requires extended school year. I wouldn't rely on that, right? So as parents, sometimes you have to advocate for the extended school year or for support to mitigate some of that regression and potential long recoupment period. Not understanding eligibility for ESY. So why or why not is your student qualifying for ESY? What data does the school have to support that or not support that, right? We want to make sure that there is data and that the school has that to show that that student doesn't need extended school year or, on the other side does need it. I also encourage families to take their own data, especially over those longer break periods. Have that conversation early. If it was a concern last year, your student didn't qualify for ESY, but that you have the same concerns, request some really robust data monitoring before and after those longer breaks to look at. Um, so aside from ESY, looking at the summer itself, so overbooking your child, so too many activities, and on the other side, doing nothing at all, right? So we should be working on some of those skills, especially some of the skills that Becky talked about, that maybe that child doesn't have as much exposure during the summertime. So those social, emotional skills, we want to make sure that they have exposure to peers. And then those executive functioning skills that really need frequent practice. We want to make sure that parents are supporting that over the summer, obviously without overdoing it. We also want your child to have some downtime, obviously. And then documenting. We want to make sure our parents are documenting any concerns that they have early enough. So, and then again, I'm going to reiterate that the biggest mistake is thinking that summer planning starts in June. It really starts now or even prior to now, right? So that would be my 2 cents on the
Yeah,
mistakes made.
that's
Yeah,
fantastic. Yeah, so essentially, it sounds like what you're saying is the biggest mistake is starting to plan your summer in June, thinking that the
right.
summer planning starts in June when really it's much more strategic than that. So really, as long as you have these lists and these things in mind and you start planning sooner, it shouldn't be as complicated and concerning as it could be. So really, like everything else that we talk about, especially on this podcast, is the proactive thinking. Again, we empathize deeply for parents who have this additional kind of burden on them to plan out when they really want to just be there for their kids and be a parent. This is something, parents experience all different types of challenges, caregivers do in general, but this is one that we support parents in navigating because it is an additional just thing to lift while they're trying to just be parents sometimes. um Okay, so in terms of actionable next steps, because we talked about some of the mistakes. Sarah did delve into some of the things that can be done to alleviate these mistakes. Let's talk about a little bit more about actionable steps that can be taken to empower those who are listening to do certain things in advance of summer. Sarah, so can you talk
Sure.
to me about some of the things that parents can be doing right now to address the things that could happen otherwise during the summer?
Yes. So obviously reviewing your child's progress. So looking at progress monitoring, current IEP goals, making sure that they're making appropriate progress. Again, I'm going to continue to say looking over longer breaks to see how long that recoupment period is, and asking questions, speaking to your child's teacher or at the IEP table and saying, what, I'm concerned potentially about what's going to happen over summer if my student isn't receiving any services. What data do you have to show that, I don't need to have those concerns or that we need to consider extended school year? There are also other things that families can do outside therapy. So, again, looking at making sure your child has exposure to peers and social groups. Maybe it's tutoring for academics if your child has some academic needs. And then also, having some sort of schedule over the summer that kind of helps alleviate a lot of the stress too. So going into the summer, families know that, we're going to not overdo this, but we're going to spend some time focusing on some of those skills that my child is working on during the school year to help potentially with any of that regression or recoupment. And then again, to reiterate that documentation piece. So making sure you're documenting your concerns early, that you're bringing that up to the team. You can take your own data, right? We always encourage families to do that if there are concerns or if there's any disagreements with the school team themselves. And I urge families, if you are noticing regression now, that's a red flag for someone, right? So bring that up to your school team as soon as possible. And then also, when talking about summer schedule, you, I want to encourage families, don't be stressed out about, a packed summer. You don't need a packed schedule. You just need a purposeful one, especially when we're talking about students who have IEPs and who are working on skills that need extra practice over the summer to make sure that that regression either doesn't happen or it's minimal, and that recoupment period isn't too substantial.
Great. And I think you said this, but documentation of everything, correct? Just keeping things
Yes.
documented, keeping concerns, as up to date as possible, because you want to have that going into the next school year. So essentially, if you're noticing regression at this time, like Sarah said, that's a red flag. And it's something to really pay attention to during the summer. And these are things that, if you haven't already done so, which is completely understandable, any type of break that your child has, that's a good time to keep a pulse on how well they do in terms of maintaining skills. And otherwise, like Sarah said, be having balance, having a schedule that gives a little bit of what every child needs, while also paying attention to the fact that all children need a break during the summer is something that can be done for sure. Okay. So Becky, one of the things that, Sarah mentioned that is a part of many IEPs is extended school year services. Can you talk to me about what ESY, as we call it, is, and any other kind of information that could be helpful for listeners on how to ask for it or how to utilize it and take advantage of it?
Sure, absolutely. So when we're talking about extended school year, or we abbreviate it as ESY, we're really talking about special education programming that takes place over the summer. It is a really crucial component of the IEP for students who are at risk of regression, or who have difficulty recouping the skills that they lose. And it allows the school to continue providing, assistance and education on all of those IEP goals, even while school is out over the summer, so that students aren't losing a lot of their progress. In terms of so those decisions are made within the IEP team. It is a component in the IEP. And this is where all of that documentation that Sarah has been talking about and the data that's collected by the team over the other breaks during the year becomes really important. If we see that students are losing progress on their IEP goals over breaks in the fall, over winter break, over spring break, those all become important considerations and things that might, it's always a team decision, but those are things that the team will consider when they're looking at eligibility for ESY and determining whether it is appropriate and necessary for students to continue their IEP over the summertime in order to not lose their skills. There are, I would say, some common misconceptions about ESY. Sometimes we hear, that people think it's only for really severe needs, and that isn't true. It really is for any student with an IEP who has a lot of regression and recoupment of those IEP goals, and of those skills that they really need in order to continue to make progress in the curriculum. And we, sometimes families also think that schools will automatically offer it, but that also isn't always true. And so that's also why, as Sarah has been talking about, it's so important for families to do their own research, to advocate for their children, to pay attention to how their kids are doing before and after those shorter breaks that we have. Because if we're seeing any type of regression over winter break, which can be a week or a couple of weeks, then we're definitely going to see regression over the summer, which is a much longer break from school, and a break from that instruction. So it's very important to be paying attention to those things, asking those questions at the IEP table, making sure that the school is really taking data, and always advocating, for your kids. ESY really isn't just about catching up, it's about not falling behind.
Absolutely. Thank you, Becky. Yeah, so overall, we've talked a lot about what the summer really is in terms of the experience of a student who has additional needs, who really needs consistent support throughout the entire year, and kind of the role of caregivers and taking some important proactive steps so as to not make some common mistakes. And then we mentioned a little bit about how a lot of these things that can be provided as support in the summer can require some more complicated and intentional conversations with the school. Now, obviously, we'd hope those conversations always go well. Our experiences, oftentimes, they might need some advocacy from an outside support system that knows what to ask for. And obviously, our team is very equipped to do that. So, some signs that you might need help might include the school just flat out denying services, which is something that, is already a red flag. But if you're going into the summer with concerns about your child's skills, that is a good sign that you're going to need to have a more intentional conversation with the school with some specific asks and specific kind of negotiation tactics. Um, if a parent is just overall confused about what they can ask for and why, that sounds like maybe some education needed on what those parents' rights are and how to ask for things and what their options might be. And then if the child, like we said, has a history of regression and maybe that regression isn't really either identified or recognized by the school in a meaningful way, this is the time to seek potential advocacy support from a team like ours. And the ways in which our team helps, I will speak for you because you were on the ground doing this, Becky and Sarah. I see you clarifying what the options are for families. I see you preparing them for the meetings that are intentionally set to discuss these types of summer concerns. And then I also see you supporting communication with schools. I'll give a plug for a team that I always give, which is that we have a really uniquely strong tone in that we go in firmly but collaboratively in a very, very effective way. We are a law firm, so we have the law education behind everything that we do. We have very, very skilled negotiators and neutral members of the team right here on this call. And we are very, very skilled at getting results while not burning relationships. Um, so at the end of the day, what we want to say in this moment is that you don't have to figure this out alone. Like I said, we hold no criticism or judgment against parents who really just find this very hard to navigate because it is incredibly complicated. And like I said about our team, advocacy isn't about fighting, it's just making sure that your child's needs are understood, and that is included during the summer. So creating a realistic summer plan. Let's talk about what this would look like, and how it can be accessible to caregivers. So um, some of the things that we talk about are the learning opportunities that might be available to students. Sarah, can you talk to me about what those learning opportunities are or could be?
Yeah, sure. And obviously this is very individualized based on student and also the family, right? So is it are both parents working? Is the child going to be in camp or with a family member, or are they going to be home, right? So it depends. And if the student is receiving ESY, they're going to be hopefully working on some of those skills while they're in the extended school year program. Otherwise, we want to make sure that whatever skills your child needs support on, that you as a family is supporting that. So whether that's daily reading with your student, whether it's practicing mastered sight words, whether it's having a neighborhood kind of play group, right, where hopefully your student is able to kind of work on some of those social skills with children of their age. Um, and then making sure you're also incorporating rest and fun, right? So making sure, and also making those learning opportunities fun themselves. There's a big opportunity for that over the summer. And working on generalizing those skills too, to make sure if your student was mastering these skills within school, okay, let's generalize these outside of school, make sure that they're able to do these also out, in the home setting or with peers outside of the school setting.
Absolutely. Can you give me some examples of what those might look like for parents? Some real life examples?
Yeah, sure. So summer camps, right? That's a big one. We know a lot of families rely on summer camps and, depending on what your child's interests are, a lot of them can be interest based. So science summer camps, neighborhood summer camps, right? Sometimes students need support at those summer camps, and you could let the camp know. Some camps are very accommodating when it comes to students with disabilities, right? And they have, built-in supports within the camp itself. There's tutoring. Again, we're talking more about some of those academic-based needs, having a tutor come in and help work on those skills with your student. Building routines at home is really big. So making sure that you are working on some of that routine building skills while you're with your family, right? And then we want to encourage flexibility. So again, this is not about perfection, right? We also recognize that summer is about fun and downtime, and that's so important for your child as well. So a good summer plan isn't rigid; it's just intentional.
Absolutely. That's very, very helpful, as a reminder to parents that it does not have to be so structured that you lose the summer.
Right.
It's just, planned ahead, intentionally
Mhm.
planned. Okay. So, as we close out, one of the major messages that I think that Becky, Sarah, you both have reiterated over and over again is just simply to don't wait. If you are seeing any of the red flags we talked about or concerned at all, just get ahead of it just for your own sanity. Um, and just take small steps, some of the small steps that Sarah said. It doesn't have to be rigid, just intentional. And if you have any concerns or any questions, our team is very equipped at answering them. We have some special services that we offer for the summer for families to keep on top of these things and feel like they are getting ahead of it. You can reach out to us for guidance, you can schedule a consultation, or you can follow us on social media for more tips. But we are here to help. And like I said, the best time to plan for summer is before it starts. So we are here to help, and we appreciate you all listening. And we look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thanks.